Okay, seriously, this is way too hard with the sunglasses. Alright, much better. My idea for this video came while teaching on Zoom a few months back. And if you didn't already know, I'm a university ESL teacher. So like any good ESL teacher, I was working with my students on how to effectively lie in English. And in order to help them practice what I had taught them, I decided we should play Two Truths and a Lie. Two Truths and a Lie is a pretty straightforward game. Basically, you tell 3 facts about yourself. 2 of them are true and 1 of them's a lie. And then the other people have to ask questions to try and figure out which one you're lying about. My 3 that day, as I remember, were my favorite color is pink, I rarely eat meat, and I was 7 the first time I shot a gun. Now, I've played this game a few times with my students over the years, so admittedly I'm pretty good at it, but I've never had it go like this, where not a single student picked the lie. What I wasn't prepared for, though, was just how indignant they were going to be about that. My lie was that my favorite color is pink. And before I knew it, I had a whole class full of students arguing with me about what my favorite color is. It was... honestly, it was hilarious, and it was fun, and it made for a great class. Oh, and maybe I should also mention, this is exactly what I was wearing. And this chair is exactly where I was sitting. That experience, however, left an impression on me that I've honestly been wrestling with ever since. Is pink my favorite color now? Am I really that much of a stereotype? I mean, yeah, I love this pink top, and this one, and this one, and this one, and this one.
I love these pink sunglasses, and these pink sunglasses, and this one, and
these pink sunglasses, charging cable, this one, pink computer glasses, pink accent, this one.
But come on, it's not like transitioning changes your favorite color. I mean, what would the TERF say? Okay, so obviously I do really love pink, but even if I choose a pink aesthetic literally every time I'm given the option to digitally do so, that doesn't mean it's my favorite color. But after all, why not? So what? Would conceding that pink could possibly be my favorite color really be the worst thing in the world? I mean, who cares what my favorite color is, or what anyone's favorite color is? But would we really even be having this conversation if I said it were red, or blue, or yellow, or green, or purple?
This one.
Especially after everything I've gone through to publicly transition, why was I even having this endless internal dialogue with myself? Being told that I was bound for hell hadn't fazed me in years. Ditto for being told I look like a man, being called a degenerate, or a freak, or whatever other 3 things transphobes have to say about trans people. I was used to rejection, being disregarded as an evil SJW, being intentionally misgendered by strangers and family alike, but this was somehow giving me an identity crisis unlike any that I had had since my egg had cracked. I guess I'd never really wrestled with all the social, psychological, and cultural reasons for why pink is the one color you're not allowed to say is your favorite. Probably because I'd never considered the fact that it could potentially be mine. So, wanting answers and being the nerd that I am, I decided to do a bit of a dive on it. So, just because I haven't explicitly mentioned it, pink, at least in American culture, is generally considered the most feminine color. There's a whole discussion to be had about this, but before I can really get to it, it's important to discuss how this came about in the first place. So, history first and implications second. Should you ever take it upon yourself to look up the cultural history of the color pink, the first thing you'll find is that it wasn't really a gendered color until sometime in the early 20th century. Prior to that, color didn't really have an explicit gender, and the gendering of pink is closely tied with the history of fashion. However, in centuries past, rich people of all genders were known to wear pink at times, though the extreme inequality of hierarchical societies under imperialism meant that most people just made do with whatever undyed clothing their peasant hands could get a hold of. Rather than being specifically quartered off along gendered lines, it is important to note that pink, as well as blue, did carry some culturally defined age division in that they were both considered to be youthful colors. Thus, it was common to dress young boys and girls alike in both pinks and blues. This follows the history of children's clothing styles in general, actually, as it was also extremely common to dress all children in dresses, regardless of gender. And y'all thought it was all the soy. Also, just look at this adorable picture of FDR, America's 32nd president, known best for leading the country out of the Depression and against Adolf Hitler. Oh wait, this isn't making the point I want. FDR, America's 32nd president, known best for leading the country out of the Depression and against Adolf Hitler. Also, who wore it better, he or Eleanor? I mean, come on. The hat? The white socks with those little black flats? So stinking cute. It wasn't until the late 19th, early 20th century that we started to see opinions about which colors were most appropriate for boys and girls. Famously, during this time, blue was actually considered the most appropriate color for girls and pink for boys, as demonstrated in this magazine excerpt from 1918.
The generally accepted rule is pink for the boys and blue for the girls. The reason is that pink, being a more decided and stronger colour, is more suitable for the boy, while blue, which is more delicate and dainty, is prettier for the girl.
It wasn't until the post-war era that this trend broadly flipped to what we know it as today, and according to historian Anne-Marie Adams, we have the Nazis to thank for that. In the second video I ever made, which is very poorly recorded and edited, but can be found up here, I discussed how the Nazis used inverted pink triangles to distinguish gay and trans concentration camp prisoners, and by Adams' understanding, this was the beginning of society's labeling of pink as an exclusively non-masculine color, gay men being considered inherently less masculine than straight men back in those Stone Age days. Whether or not there is any validity to that assessment, it is true that hard codification of pink for girls, blue for boys is an explicitly post-war phenomenon. And while the idea may have been started by the Nazis, the catalyst for its spread is owed entirely to marketing. Yes, like everything bad in the world, I am going to reduce this down to fascism and capitalism, so keep up. More than anyone else, we owe gender division of color to clothing manufacturers in the 40s and 50s who began marketing pink baby clothes for girls and blue baby clothes for boys. Yeah, that's really it. Dividing baby clothes along gendered lines means an expanded market for selling baby clothes. When children's clothes were all relatively gender neutral, a young boy could wear his sister's hand-me-downs, which meant that parents were less likely to buy new clothes for their children. Or as someone once put it,
the need of a constantly expanding market for its products chases the bourgeoisie over the entire surface of the globe. It must nestle everywhere, settle everywhere, establish connections everywhere.
First Lady Mamie Eisenhower helped solidify the distinction of pink as feminine after she wore a pink dress to her husband's inauguration, which led to pink being described as the color, quote, ladylike women wear. Jackie Kennedy reinforced this in the early 60s, and all those factors combined are why Walmarts across the country continue to have aisles that look like this. But isn't that all sort of a very arbitrary reason why pink is seen as the color of femininity? Short answer, yes, it's absolutely arbitrary. Next section. Okay, the question of why we associated different colors with different traits is actually a good deal more complex than I've made it out to be, and the answers are rooted in psychology, culture, and even language. Now, I have a background in anthropology and linguistics, so those last two factors I feel much more comfortable talking about than psychology, which I have relatively little knowledge in. That said, the psychology of color is a deep and extremely interesting topic that I'm only going to touch very lightly on, so if you're interested in why restaurants often code their products in red rather than blue, I recommend looking up more on your own. When you think of red, what words do you associate with it? Love? Passion? Anger? Blood? What about yellow? Happy? Sunny? Calm? For various reasons, every color features a list of nouns or adjectives with which it is commonly associated. Depending on where you're from or what language you speak, you may find that some of those words differ from mine, but regardless, color as being representative of other things is a universal human experience. Now, when you think of pink, what words come to mind? Victoria's Secret hopes you'll say soft or sexy, but odds are that whatever words come to mind are also words you associate with femininity. Counterpoint. What about blue? As you think of those words, I have one more question. Do you equate as many of those words with masculinity as you did the pink words with femininity? Do you associate any of those words exclusively with masculinity? Under a misogynistic system that says it's okay for girls to be tomboys, but a cardinal sin for boys to be sissies, where men are lauded as being strong and intelligent and women are denigrated as being weak and frivolous, things which are labeled as explicitly feminine are quartered off as bad and only for women, whereas masculinity is an ideal of good that ought to be encouraged. This is why blue is not an all-encompassing masculine color the same way that pink is seen as being wholly feminine. It's okay, therefore, for a girl to love the color blue, but if a boy says he loves pink, forget about it. Thanks to capitalism and the patriarchy, the color pink became a sort of metaphorical prison for women, one in which all the perceived societal negatives of femininity could be placed and separated. Women ought to aspire to all the things pink culturally represents to us: soft, pretty, and sweet. And implicitly, only women should ever aspire to such things. It's no wonder, therefore, that pink is often described as the most controversial color of them all. To many women, stating that pink is your favorite color can feel like a concession to all the cultural trappings that have historically held them back from true social parity with men, or perhaps an admission that one prefers the subservient role women have traditionally had to play to men. And pink remains the most gendered of all colors. Save in 2004 during the age of the metrosexual, when pink polos with popped collars and the sentiment that real men wear pink briefly appeared on the scene. What an interesting time to look back on. There's never really been any sort of push to make pink an acceptable color for masculine men. I mean, come on. If a man were to say pink is his favorite color, first of all, that man is a badass, but I can already hear it. What is he, some kind of queer? And this is not me making a half-contrived argument that any woman who loves pink is a secret trad wife, or that any man who loves it is secretly gay, or worse. But rather, why an open preference for pink can be implicitly or explicitly controversial within our culture. It was at this crossroads, with all my internalized misogyny and all my self-doubts about being an authentic woman, that I found myself wrestling with one of the weirdest identity crises I had faced since telling people that I'm a girl, actually. So let's finally talk about that bit, because gods know that there is no subject I love talking about more than myself. I began hormone therapy on September 13th, 2018, which, as of the day of this recording, is tomorrow, so yay me. It really goes without saying that early transition is such a wild and critical period in a trans person's life. Honestly though, as exciting as it was to finally be living my truth, as they say, I've since realized that I have blocked out a lot of that first year of transition from my memory. I just did not have the confidence or strength in myself, and in a lot of ways, it was not a great period of my life. That first year was the time when I learned which people in my life were awesome, supportive, and worthy of my love, and which ones were best cut out for good. But in the cozy retrospect of a year or two later, what I'm coming to realize is that every damaging comment I received during that time wasn't venomous, blatant transphobia. And of those subtler but still damaging comments I received, apparently those that I most deeply and unknowingly internalized were often made by cis women who really were just trying to be supportive. I have described many of the reasons why people within my culture may be loath to admit a preference for pink, but trans women not only deal with amplified versions of each of these, but they also have to struggle with a hidden transphobia that is so well integrated within our culture that many are not even aware of its influence. Now, before I get into this, I do want to make it clear that I probably had an easier time than many who come out as trans feminine in the South. Not that I didn't have my own fair share of haters and creepers, and I continue to do so, but I also have an amazing cast of supportive friends and a fully accommodating workplace, both of which are huge. God, this feels like a freaking coming out video. Okay, let me just say the thing. My name is Mila Renee, my pronouns are she, her, and I'm a pinko. One of the most persistent questions I was asked by other women when I first came out was what my girl style was going to be. I even made fun of this a few videos back. Often, this was completely innocent and supportive and just made by women who genuinely wanted to help me wade through the incredible but super intimidating world of women's fashion. I'll arbitrarily say that that's where like 90% of those comments came from, but the other 10% looked something more like this. What are you planning on wearing? Oh, I don't know. I guess I'll figure it out. Well, you know you don't have to wear dresses every day, right? Or ever. Lots of women never wear dresses or makeup. Oh, okay, yeah, of course I know that. No, you're right. I probably won't wear dresses.
No one knows what it's like to be.
For the record, I freaking love wearing dresses. They're not only insanely comfortable, but the good ones make everything look... But it was not always so. In the same vein as realizing that I wasn't really allowed to say that I liked pink, I learned early on that I wasn't really allowed to say that I loved wearing dresses either. There's a stigma that all trans women face and that TERFs just absolutely love to perpetuate, that trans women are all just men and woman face, and that they dress like it's prom every day. That somehow we are this parody of womanhood, and that in adopting all of the trappings of womanhood, you know, long hair, makeup, jewelry, high heels, and yes, dresses in the color pink, we are both mocking real women and perpetuating all of the gendered stereotypes that all of those real women have worked so hard to overcome for so long. Thus, in wearing a dress, I would not only be invalidating myself as a trans woman, but I would be invalidating myself as a feminist, something that I took very seriously and had identified as long before I ever realized that I might actually be a woman myself. Sometimes it's hard to remember exactly what it felt like back then, I've so effectively blocked it out, but these were the external conditions that led me to write this in my old blog, about a year before I broke down and finally decided to transition. I don't know if my external reflection could ever be representative of how I perceive myself or how I want to perceive myself. The only thing I see for myself down that road is as a grotesque other. A warped, hideous simulacrum of a female, lonelier than I already am, pitied at best, hated at worst, and never loved again. When you decide to socially transition from a more masculine role to a more feminine one, it feels like you are constantly walking this razor-thin line between not feminine enough to be taken seriously and too feminine to be taken as anything but a parody of womanhood. Fair or not, showing too clear a preference for pink puts you squarely in the latter camp in many people's eyes. And even if you recognize all the reasons why that's bullshit, it's hard not to acquiesce to it when it means the difference between being treated with indifference and being treated with scorn. Looking back, my experience in class wasn't actually the first time that I've struggled with the color pink since coming out. I mean, just in the past year, I've made 2 other videos with a predominantly pink aesthetic, and neither of those paint the color in an especially positive light. But even before that, the first thing I really remember was whenever I bought this wallet, which I love, but which I also tormented myself over because I was terrified that people were either not going to take me seriously or were even going to be disgusted by me for carrying it. I had to have constant reassurance from my roommate that it was okay because I thought I wasn't allowed to buy it. And by the way, I get compliments on this thing almost every time I go out, and you'd think I would have learned my lesson then, but clearly I had another year or better before that was finally going to sink in. I've talked about the power nostalgia has over me, and there is just something so primally satisfying to me about neon pink. But it's not just that. I actually find pink to be something that is oddly empowering. Maybe it's because I only allowed myself to start buying pink things slowly, piecemeal, one at a time. Each time I give myself permission to indulge in something pink is a personal victory, a time when I've accepted myself as a trans woman, a time when I've embraced whatever the hell it is femininity is, when I've looked at what society has deemed as negative about it, and instead taken positive ownership of it. I still think it's deeply stupid that it is such a heavily gendered color, and in an ideal world, it wouldn't be, and everyone would feel free to enjoy it or not to whatever capacity they liked. A world where anything marketed to women wasn't automatically slathered in a rose coat, where it was just like any other color, representative of a slew of emotions and adjectives, but not one of them related to gender. Maybe we'll get there one day, and I do think we're slowly approaching that. But until then, I'll try to at least be a little better at admitting my own love for it. See, I am capable of ending a video on a happy note. Special thanks to YouTubers Elle Summers and Ellie Dawson of Red Letter Days. To crib from her delightfully succinct Twitter bio, Elle is a lefty SJW type person who talks about media and autism on YouTube. Red Letter Days, meanwhile, is a leftist channel that discusses theory in addition to topics like Crusader Kings 2, disco, light brights, and groceries. On a more personal note, I can attest that both Elle and Ellie are wonderfully lovely people, which is reflected in their unique and insightful content. This is my first time collaborating with other creators, so I wanted to make sure that I did it with 2 of my very favorites. So please, go give them some love. As with all my videos, I owe so much of this one to my wonderful patrons. I'm still so humbled that there are people out there that like my work enough to pay me for it. If you'd like to support my efforts to continue growing this channel, consider being a patron yourself. Or, if you are like me and can't afford to do that, consider doing all the things that other YouTubers always ask you to do. Like, share, subscribe, leave a comment, turn the lights off, look in the mirror, say my name 3 times, beg for mercy for my eldritch projection. You know, that sort of stuff.